for anyone who is listening, we both follow Menno Henselman. I'm probably a bit more new to his content, but he's been putting out really solid content pretty much every single day, covering new studies. He's a great resource if you wanted to stay up to date on the latest science. So he's covering actual research that have test subjects that run a gauntlet of whatever set parameters and then are tested after, and tested while as well. So it's nice if you're really into science-based shit like we are. He recently posted about emphasizing certain hypertrophic effects in muscle groups stemming from exercise selection and also volume ranges. And so we're going to dive a bit into that today, starting with exercises. So when you first read this, what were your initial thoughts? Was it super interesting? Was it something that you're like, yeah, dude, I know this makes sense? Or I want to dive more into this and get to know more about it?
Yeah, so I think an important place to start is that muscle groups we've known for a long time respond differently to different exercises. So I think that's an important caveat, is if you are talking about your quads, for example, right? You have 4 heads or 4 independent aspects of your quad muscle. That's why it's called quad muscle. And because of that, it is divided up in a way that has different structures of the muscular fibers. And because of those muscular fiber differences, the way that they're actually in series, in parallel, the architecture there, they create different forces on the tendon. And that is where it comes into, people saying, duck your feet or point your toes out to hit like your sweep, or, like point your toes in to hit like the medial aspect of your hamstring, like stuff like that. People start talking about just all this like wild pseudoscience-y shit to specify very region-specific areas of your muscle groups. And it's pseudoscience-y, but it is based on almost like the pragmatic side of training, where it's like, this seems like it should make sense because like we look at our muscles and that's just kind of how they work. But if you actually cut the skin away, what you'll see is that a lot of these muscle groups have common origins and they have common insertion tendons. So it tends to wash out in the end, right? So whether your stance is narrow or if it's wide doing hack squats, or if your feet are pointed in or out doing hamstring curls, most of the time, even if you might have slight variances, it's going to be pretty similar and pretty even with like the stimuli that you're getting across those different muscle groups or individual muscles there. But because of that, because there are slight differences, we do know that there are different ways of hitting those individual muscles. So another good example here is like the triceps. We know that the triceps is 3 muscles, but the long head actually has an origin on the scapula, whereas the other 2 heads of the tricep, they insert on, Jesus, I'm thinking about this all wrong. What is that?
It would be the acromion.
Acromion, is it? Man, either way, they have different origins. Wow, I need to brush up on my anatomy. So essentially what that means is that the long head is going to be much more heavily stimulated from things like shoulder extension and shoulder flexion. So you're actually going to be able to take your long head through a range of motion there, whereas the other heads of your triceps, the medial and then what is the other head of the tricep? Am I losing my mind?
You have medial short. You have medial short long.
Probably.
Yeah.
I feel like my mind is immediately going towards like more complicated and complex answers here, but essentially like that's where you start getting some variation specific muscle growth. But what this study was talking about was essentially taking a muscle that has a common insertion and origin and being able to preferentially target different regions of that muscle. So what that would be like saying is, if you're doing a quad extension or leg extension, you would be able to hit the distal aspect of your quad harder than the proximal aspect of your quad. And for most people, we don't think like that. Like, we can assume that if there is a lever point and if there's a lot more torque at that lever, it might be reasonable to guess that the part of the muscle that's closest to that joint might be hit harder. But that's never really played out, right? So what's always happened and what we've always seen is if you do leg extensions, your quads get stimulated, and we really don't get that much difference between what's distal versus what's proximal. But there was a study that Chris is alluding to, and in the study they used, I believe, like different variations of crunches or ab exercises. So I think they did like crunches, they did leg raises, essentially training the upper half or upper region of the abs, and then also the lower region of the abs. And if you look at those movements, you can kind of bro science your way to say, oh yeah, like a crunch will hit your upper abs and a leg raise will hit your lower abs. But that's never really been played out, right? Like that's never been something that has been an actual recommendation for people that are in the business. And if you started to go that far, you would kind of just get like pushed away as like a bro scientist, right? But now it is starting to kind of play out that way, where we're seeing some localized hypertrophy, just with different variations in how you're doing it. But I do think that it is important to note that the statistical effects of these things are going to be like so insignificant compared to every other aspect that potentiates hypertrophy. It's probably not going to really be worth putting too much mental energy into thinking about or breaking your training down into that much specificity. That was my biggest takeaway, right? Like you can look at it and you can say, yeah, it does kind of make sense. Like it passes like the litmus test. But at the same time, it's, in my mind, it's just probably not one of those things beyond very, very specific muscle groups like the abs, where it's just so easy to say, all right, I'm gonna do crunches for my upper abs, I'm gonna do leg raises for my lower abs. But if you're starting to talk about other muscle groups, like the biceps, for instance, like you're probably not wanting to start thinking about doing like, supinated front raises for your proximal biceps, right? Like it's probably not going to work like that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. For integrity purposes, Bryce is getting ready to bounce tomorrow, and I was not ready to be put on the spot. I don't know. I said fucking the acromion, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. So it's lateral, medial, and long head of the triceps. The long head. Yeah, the long head obviously attaches on the shoulder blade, but it doesn't make it, like, of course, the other two heads, they attach just distal of the humeral head, because obviously they only perform elbow flexion. And you actually have, yeah, I mean, it only makes sense. So I'm like, why are we both fucking stupid right now? This is fantastic. Yeah, 100%. That should probably be nixed, Mr. Ben, if you're listening. But I think you hit a really, really important piece there. You talked about the importance of this. And I was going to ask that, which article do you find more impactful for the average person, right? Because we work with competitors, and for some, right, especially when you're like super fucking lean and you're trying to balance your physique to the, 0.0% to compare against another person who's dialed their physique into that degree as well, this could be stuff to think about, right? We can definitely start to implement the minutia of training. But again, to your point, it all kind of washes out. Like once you get enough volume, enough intensity, enough consistency, your training age continues to, expand and grow as you pack on more and more volume in the lifetime of training that you do. Are people really going to notice? Like when you just have huge fucking quads, like, oh, bro, your medial quad's just not quite there, It does lend itself, I think, to interesting conversations. Like, speaking of quads, have you ever seen Bryce's quads? His teardrop is probably bigger than his fucking kneecap. Like it just sits right there next to his kneecap, and it lends itself to like, okay, well, insertions different for everybody. And also, are there certain, orthopedic versions that you have where you're like, okay, like his bone structure is kind of set up this way that biases his quad movements in this very small degree, but over 16, 20 years of training, I don't know why I said 16, 15, 20 years of training or whatever, it's amassed to this kind of structure when he's, with his quad compared to other people, which is interesting. I think it's just all interesting. And I think to your point of how much importance this should really carry, it's just interesting. I think for me, there's probably more importance in the volumes, the variety of okay, what's the importance of mixing up your exercises versus the importance of mixing up your volume ranges? And how do you weigh that? Because obviously variety is important, but I do think there's probably one that's more important than the other. If you had to choose, which one was more important?
Well, the interesting thing is that I think that what they studied in these papers, it aligns with intuition anyway,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, in the first one that we were just talking about, you have regional training or regional specification of these muscle groups by exercise variation. So again, you would look at something like an upper ab crunch versus a lower ab reverse crunch. So again, intuitively, that makes sense. Like you're looking at it, you're like, this doesn't completely like collapse my internal model of how training should work.
Right.
And there's some things that do, right? And I think this actually kind of goes into the second study. Blood flow restriction is one of those things where it's like you hear it and you're like, that just seems too good to be true. It seems like there has to be something that someone is missing. And it lends a lot more like incredulity to believing that blood flow restriction is not just some kind of like snake oil thing.
Right.
I get. And that's where it's always difficult to like convince people, like, give it a shot. I know it's a little bit fucking weird, but just try it out. But in the second study, again, they do something and they go with a setup that aligns with like our internal models of how training should work, right? So they take a stiff leg deadlift, I believe, is like a stiff leg deadlift or some kind of deadlift variation for the hamstrings, and they perform it for lower reps and higher loads. And then they take a hamstring curl and they perform it for higher reps and lower loads. And they do their best to equate the volume, but with the hamstring curl variation, they also use blood flow restriction. So there were, I guess, confounding variables there, which I probably, if I were setting that study up, would not have used blood flow restriction, but maybe there was a specific reason why they did that. But what they found was that doing each of those exercises promoted different muscle growth in different aspects of the hamstring. So I think it was the semitendinosus for the deadlift variation. I think it was the semimembranosus for the leg curl variation, which is weird. It's a little bit weird, right? Especially considering those aspects of your hamstring, they're not proximal versus distal, right? And that's where I think that most people would start to assume that it would make sense to say, oh yeah, if you're doing leg curls, you're going to be training your hamstring that's closer to the knee.
Right.
If you're doing deadlifts, you're training your hamstrings that's closer to like your glute ham tie-in, right? Closer to your hips. And I think that if you view the regional differences there more so as there is a difference between doing high reps with a more isolation-based movement and low reps with a more compound movement, then it's okay. Like that's about as far as you need to go, right? You don't need to know whether it's hitting like your semimembranosus or tendinosus or biceps femoris. It doesn't matter what aspect of your hamstrings that it's actually targeting. All you need to know is that there is a tangible difference between doing a high rep isolation movement and a low rep compound movement. And from there, you're good. You're good, right? Because again, that passes like the smell test.
Mm-hmm.
If you tell someone that, it's not going to completely throw them off. They're not gonna be like, well, that doesn't make any fucking sense. Because we know like there is a purpose behind doing higher rep, higher volume isolation work versus lower rep, higher load compound stuff. So anyway, like I think that they're interesting. And I think it's interesting mostly just because of the differences in how the muscle growth was measured between two unique muscles that whenever you look at them and view them, they don't have like gigantically different purposes.
Yeah.
And functions, right? Like they're very similar. So my guess would be that there are probably like unknown unknowns going on there, and something is being measured and caught in the data that is creating an effect where it probably would wash out over a larger sample size. But I don't think that that's necessarily the most important take home. I think the most important take home is that, yeah, there is a tangible difference between doing training that is, again, isolation and high rep and compound and low rep. And if you can just wrap your mind around that, all of a sudden it's like, well, no shit.
Yeah. No, I mean, like you said, very intuitive. Like even a person I think who was just a general enthusiast could probably go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think where it gets interesting for the nerds is me. I'm like, okay, well, in a world where you had to choose, okay, maybe I don't get to change my program ever. I have to do the same movements and I get to change volumes. Or I have the same volume forever and I can change the movements. Where will I see the most progress? Where will I find that I continue to push forward towards whatever strength and growth goals I might have? So looking at the studies and then trying to find the strength of the correlation between them. It's like, okay, well, which seem to have the greater impact? Which you have to actually go into the studies, figure out obviously the equated volume that they use and for how long. But I felt like the volume study was more impactful as far as like if you look across the groups and the changes that they saw. Obviously, when you're measuring something like the minutia, hey, this head grew more when, or this part of the abdomen, the abs grew more than, it gets a bit hairier.
Yeah.
Curious though, if you had those two worlds, is there one that you would pick where you're like, hey, like I would definitely think varying volume is more important or varying exercise is more important? Speaking, I guess I should say caveat, not thinking lifestyle, because obviously moving your body in a variety of planes is very, very important for being able to live a whole life. But if you're just speaking strictly growth and strength.
So I think what's important too, like you're using volume, but what they actually tested in the study was rep range.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So if we're asking that question, I think it's a lot easier, because if we're just going to settle on a rep range that's like 8 to 12 versus 20 to 30, yeah, I'm going to go 8 to 12,
yeah.
100%. If we're talking volume, then that becomes a lot hairier, right? Because then that does encompass some aspects of like, okay, well, progression models can depend on volume as well. But in general, I would say I would probably go with variation. And the reason I say that is because
movement variation.
Yeah. So there are certain muscle groups that are going to be just fine with like one really good exercise, and you probably don't need to do too much outside of that. Like calves, you do a standing calf raise and do it well, you're probably okay. Like you are going to miss out a little bit on doing like seated calf raises with your soleus, because the soleus has slightly different function. It has slightly different fiber type composition, which actually does go back into like why we see some of these like variances between high rep versus low rep and how that actually transpires and transfers over into hypertrophy. And my guess actually would be that a lot of what we see is going to come back to fiber type distribution over a larger and larger and larger sample. But there are other muscles, unlike calf raises or unlike biceps, where you do need variance to be able to effectively hit the entire muscle. So hamstrings are a good example, right? Like, yeah, you can get a long way with just doing like stiff leg deadlifts, but you are going to be missing something by not doing a hamstring curl variation. Or lats. You can get a long way with just doing like, a single arm high cable row, right? It's like if you set it up really well and you try and like optimize that, you can get pretty far. But because the lat has such a varied insertion angle with how the muscle actually fans from like your thoracic rib cage all the way down to your thoracolumbar fascia, that is a hard fucking word to say, by the way. But because of just
we can't get triceps.
Yeah, no, dude, yeah. Well,
no.
Good. But it's because of the way that the lat is anatomically positioned. One exercise is probably not going to be enough to effectively target all of those lat fibers like you want. Delts are another good example, right? Like, I mean, sure, you can say a machine lateral raise, you can say like an overhead press, whatever, but your delts are so multifunctional and versatile that you're going to be leaving a little bit on the table. You could again say, all right, well, front delts are going to get hit by pressing, rear delts are going to get hit by rowing. But I think that's an important aspect here, is some muscles respond much better to variation in exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Some don't really need that much, and we throw exercise in to keep us from being bored all the time.
Right.
And then it's probably more useful in certain cases to vary rep ranges, especially if you're not using a lot of exercise variation. So for example, if you're always doing standing calf raises, you might want to cycle between 5 to 8, 8 to 12, 10 to 20, 20 to 30 rep range, and then go back through that, right? Like that's how you get your variation in, and that's how you effectively target different aspects of that muscle.
Yeah.
Because again, if you go like high reps there, you're going to target your soleus in a way that seated calf raises might be doing, and that what you might be missing there. But yeah, it's just knowing how to balance all this stuff. I think it's an art, but if you know what you're doing, and if you know how to train people, and you know how to program, a lot of what we're seeing with these studies, like it wasn't super shocking to me. I think it was more so about like how statistically significant is it, and how much weight should we put on these things whenever we are programming or whenever we are conceptualizing training. And my default answer goes back to probably not that much, really not that much. Like if you're making good choices with your exercise selection, with your rep ranges, it's going to wash out anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think just echoing, excuse me, and echoing and restating, like it's the fun stuff, right? And I think that is a slight like side tangent here. We've talked about it before. So much of the general population of people get caught up in the minutia, whether it is diet related and like food timing or the types of food and this and that and types of protein. And then also in the, oh, well, what kind of cardio should I be doing? Like, go walk. Like just go walk first. And then once you get to a point to where types of cardio really matters, then we can start, getting into, it's the same thing with training, right? Like go do the leg curls, the hamstring curls, the ab work. And then once it gets to a point, if it ever does, which it most likely will never get to that point, but if it ever does, if you become a high level physique athlete, then this is the minutia to worry about. However, to your point, it's interesting and it's nice to kind of like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And it refortifies the idea that for the most part, if you think about training simply enough and I guess apparently enough, right? Like if you don't try to overcomplicate it, it all just makes sense. It's all just angles and load, and it's actually pretty simple math when you think about it and you don't overcomplicate it. So studies to be taken into consideration as like really cool, interesting, but definitely not something to hang your hat on. Even, talks about like the hypertrophy zone, which I think is something that's super interesting that we get a lot of questions from clients on, like, well, like I should probably be doing like, I'm going to drop load and go for that higher volume here because I can't really feel this, or because I'm not trying to grow my quads, right? My quads are too big, comparatively to, my hamstrings and my glutes. So I'm going to go for, high volume here. And obviously we've seen the hypertrophy zone of that, like 8 to 12, 10 to 15, 5 to 15, and now people are like 5 to 30. And it's all context dependent, right? It's very, very important that you take into consideration the context of the movement pattern, what you're doing, the load, so on and so forth. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on like the hypertrophy zone as people are listening, and obviously it was brought up in the rep study. But how do you balance the idea of, okay, we are really targeting growth, and when you are trying to step outside of the hypertrophy zone, quote unquote, what's that look like for you with clients? You're like, hey, we're going for more just muscle mind connection, metabolic approach, so on and so
forth. Whenever you're saying hypertrophy zone, do you have like are you looking at it where it's defined there?
So he actually changed it to like 5 to 30, but he's saying more so, I think to his point, I've gotten to the point where like it doesn't really exist. Like it exists, but it doesn't, right? Like it again, it's because it's so contextual, and giving anyone a blanket like, hey, like 6 to 12, right, is not really giving them the full picture, right? You have to take into consideration other things. So I guess we can start there. What would you define the hypertrophy zone? How could you best define the hypertrophy zone as simply as possible to someone?
So if we're talking about like rep range or relative load, like that type of thing. So I would say whenever you start getting to a certain level of high rep ranges, what's going to happen is you're not getting enough bang for your buck for each rep that you're performing, and you're performing essentially a lot of like junk reps to get to the point where even getting to stimulating reps, and that's really fatiguing for your body, right? You're burning a lot of energy for no reason, and that accumulates very fast. So a good example that's, I guess, no, it does make sense if we're talking about like reps, like 30 reps or something like that too. Like, what is harder on your body, doing a set to failure at 8 reps of leg press or 30 reps of leg press?
8,
right? 100% 8. Yeah. So it's going to be 8 all the time. And you can take that same idea and translate that across pretty much everything, right? It's not going to feel the same on your body, but it's the same general effect. So there is this threshold where doing too low weight, too high reps starts to be more fatiguing than it is stimulating, and you just don't want to cross that boundary. And then on the other end, start getting to a point where the load is too heavy, and you're not getting enough muscle stimulus, you're not getting enough time under tension and mechanical tension to actually produce a muscular hypertrophic growth stimulus. And it's just a lot of neural fatigue, and it's a lot of skeletal fatigue and joint fatigue, right? So if you're doing a triple on squats, like, yeah, you're probably gonna get some like quad and glute stimuli, but it's not going to be worth the amount of fatigue that you're going to generate for your nervous system, and the amount that's going to beat up your hips and your low back and your knees, and just in general the injury risk as well, right? So on both ends, you have a threshold that you just don't want to fall off that cliff.
Right.
Within that, I would say that the boundaries are really fluid, because where do we say something like a set of like a 3 rep max, right? But if you were to say, all right, we're going to do squats, but we're going to do a 5-second eccentric and a 3-second pause at the bottom, but you're only going to do 3 reps.
Right.
How does that compare to a set of 8 with 2-0-0-0 tempo, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I like you said, like you can organize my thought here. So when thinking about that, obviously you have people who love tempo. Most people hate tempo, right? And so the eccentric, the force being able to be generated in that time period, right? 5 seconds. And then I guess to your point, I'm going to shut up. How do you quantify the difference between the two, right? Because obviously you're getting more volume. In one case, what the work being done per rep is marginally lower.
Yeah. And I don't think there's a quantifiable way of equalizing those things. Like, yeah, you could say like time under tension, but even that it's not equal, because it's not the same to control an eccentric as it is to perform multiple concentrics. It's just, that's not the same stimuli, especially whenever it comes to hypertrophy. So even if the total time under tension was the exact same with doing like, you know, that set of 3 versus that set of 8, the differences on the muscular level won't be the same.
Right.
So I think that's important, but we don't really know how to equate those things. Like off the top of my head, I can't equate it. All I can say is, like, in my mind, it would make sense that those would be reasonably close. It's reasonably close. So the best way of thinking about this stuff, in my opinion, is to say, okay, like, where does it feel like it clearly moves beyond the capacity of being like productive whenever it comes to muscle growth? I would say that something like what I just like conjectured up as like a thought experiment with like the 3 rep, like very slow tempo thing, that's probably like borderline of what I would want as like a hypertrophic set. And I probably wouldn't really want to extend that too far either, right? Like that might be a one and done type of thing. And on the other end of that too, on the other side of that spectrum, you know, like it's just not super smart to try and get the bulk of your muscle growth and bulk of your gains in very high rep ranges, because you're doing a lot of work for a marginal stimulus. And that's why the hypertrophic zone had historically been that 8 to 12. It's not because there's anything magical about 8 to 12 reps. It's because it does the best job of blending a stimuli with the fatigue that's going to be generated from that set.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is, right? So like, it does make sense to say, well, yeah, you can obviously build muscle doing high reps, but you could obviously build muscle doing 30 reps, maybe even 50 reps. These things, they make sense, but it's just where is the best blend of growth stimulus to fatigue management? Like, where are you going to get the best balance whenever it comes to like long-term progressions? And in my mind, I do think that like 8 to 12 reps is probably like the easiest thing for most people to conceptualize. If you have advanced athletes and people who are capable of traversing like beyond that rep range and that spectrum and opening it up a little bit more, that's great. That's awesome. You can definitely leverage that, especially whenever you start dipping into tempos, like cluster sets, shit like that. It can get really complicated, really fun as well. But it is really important to note that the hypertrophic zone is really more of an imaginary and abstract concept. There's nothing firm about that. Nothing firm. Even this like expanded 5 to 30, it's incredibly fluid. Mm-hmm. And there's not a hard cutoff. So all of this can basically be worked around with proper programming, and was really good programming, and also appropriate exercise selection, which kind of brings us all the way back around. You wouldn't want to say, I'm doing 3 sets of 20 to 30 on a leg press.
Right. Yeah.
It just doesn't make any fucking sense. But you also wouldn't want to say, I'm going to do 3 sets of 4 to 6 on a leg curl, because that doesn't really make that much sense. Again, you have to balance the expected stimuli from the expected generation of fatigue, and also the shearing forces on your joints, the injury risk and the potential there. A lot of this, it's incredibly intuitive, right? Like, that's the thing, is we can talk about like the theoretical aspects of this for a long time, and it does get like really interesting to like break it down and say like, this is where all of this intuition comes from. But you can talk to like a beginner and be like, oh yeah, like, you know, what rep range are you shooting for on leg extensions? They're like, oh yeah, like 20, 30, something like that. I'm gonna just like rep this out. Like, oh, what are you doing on squats? Doing like a set of 3 or 5. But it's because your body gives you immediate feedback, right? Like, it doesn't really feel great to max out a leg extension and do like a hard set of 5. It feels more natural to do higher reps. Your body gives you that biofeedback. Similarly, if you try and do sets of 20 to 30 on squat, you'll die. So you don't want to do that often, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's where it's really important to listen to your body, right? Like, that's where actually listening to the biofeedback in real time can be important. Going back to kind of what you were talking about a second ago, where people do overthink it a lot. They're like, oh my God, I'm doing, you know, Bulgarian split squats and I feel my quads kicking in. It's like, well, like we've talked about this. Well, yes, like your quads are working during that movement, right? Like, they're supposed to be working. But if you reduce the load on a Bulgarian split squat so you can feel your glutes working more, understand that you're now further away from failure for your glutes as well. So you're reducing the load to feel them more and increase your mind-muscle connection, but you're actually getting less stimulus. So cool, yeah, your quads are also getting less stimulus, but now your glutes are as well. So that's something that not a lot of people really think through, and they end up just wasting their fucking time in the gym because they're chasing a stimuli that is not super correlated with muscle growth, which is mind-muscle connection. It's really not that correlated. And I think we probably talked about this before here, but
a distant tertiary. Like, obviously it's important when you can implement it, but we've referred to it as the cherry on top, or the frosting. Like, it's not the whole fucking cake, right? Like, you are sacrificing a lot if you diminish the amount of meaningful volume, you know, meaningfully loaded volume, you know, over time. Like, you're losing a lot. So we definitely hit that often. I guess you got to the point of the hypertrophic zone that I was trying to get you to. I had to try to ask a weird question, which is why it came out weird. But I think we've often said that everything's contextual. And also, I think you inadvertently sideswiped the thought that I was going to kind of push into next. Was, for the most part, again, back to the earlier point, it makes sense, right? Like, a newbie in the gym can go, I'm probably not going to do that. Or if they do it once, like, I'm not doing that again, because you said they'll die. And the biofeedback your body gets kind of pushes you in the direction that makes the most sense, because there are things that just ergonomically make sense to your body as you push on. Like, high rep, single, or I guess isolation movements make a lot more sense than high rep compound movements, because you actually want to show up the next day if you do it that way, as opposed to in reverse. It is important to recognize, while we want to add context, most people are looking for that, like, hey, what do you want me to do? Like, what should I do? I don't care about the science. I don't care about, well, if, the planets are aligned this way. I want to know exactly what I need to do, which is nice to have that zone, which, again, you hit on, just to revisit that. They're like, hey, 8 to 12 is solid because it kind of meets the mean. It takes into consideration, hey, likely movement selection for whatever it is you're trying to do when you're trying to grow, which is going to likely be a compound movement of sorts, right? Like, this is going to be the bread and butter of your session. When you're thinking about your hamstrings, you're thinking hinges. When you're thinking about your quads, you're thinking squats. And so telling you that, oh yeah, you could do between 5 and 30. It's like, it's just going to leave you in the weeds, right? So saying, hey, 8 to 12, working somewhere between 1 and 4 reps in reserve, probably a really good sweet spot to hang out if your goal is growth over time, which is why it's nice to have the context and also understand where the blanket statements come from and why they might leave the context off.
Yeah. And I mean, we probably just end this with, I feel like we do a really, maybe not we personally, but like as an industry, do a really poor job of communicating just how intuitive training should be if you are actually able to listen to the feedback and signals that your body is giving, right? That's how it should be. And that's really how a lot of these things were learned, was just going and doing physical activity and being like, oh, wow, this seems like it caters much better towards this scheme. This movement seems like it caters much better towards this very different alternative scheme. And then later on, we realized, oh shit, yeah, muscle growth does happen within the spectrums of these schemes. And that does happen with this spectrum of exercise selection, as long as these other parameters are in place. But that's because people at the very beginning of weightlifting just listen to their fucking body. They're like, this doesn't feel that good. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this like tricep extension while balanced on my fucking head. Like, didn't you send that video to us the other day?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
tell that to the Russians, though. They do some.
Yeah. It's really intuitive. If it feels wrong, it's probably wrong. If it looks wrong, it's 100% fucking wrong. Like, visual cues are great, so record your shit, right? If it looks like absolute dog shit, it probably is dog shit. But get in tune with your body. And a lot of the athletes we work with are so good at overriding their body's natural cues. And I think a lot of it stems from overriding their hunger cues, that they can't listen to the biofeedback their body's giving them in the gym either. And they're conditioned to override their discomfort biofeedback. And in a way that can be good, right? If you're able to override that little screaming guy in your head telling you to stop that set, that's a good thing, because that allows you to push further and get more reps and get closer to that technical failure point. But if you're also shutting down that screaming voice in your head whenever it's telling you that a movement just feels wrong in some way, in some amorphous way, we don't even know, but it just feels wrong, there's something not right there. If you're shutting that down, then you're overlooking potentially really valuable feedback from your body. It's like the tactile feedback is very important.
Yeah.
Right? Like your body is a sensory organ. The entire thing is incredibly integrated. It is literally built from the ground up to be able to perceive sensations. Like, that is what it is fucking great at. And if you are just really good at overriding every sensation that your body is giving you whenever you're training, of course, it's going to be really challenging to find the right or appropriate ways to do this shit.
There's a discernible difference between the pain that pushing through will make you stronger, and the pain that's like, if you keep doing this, something bad's going to happen. And understanding where that difference is.
I think it's just a mindset thing, right? Like, but I think that's where it comes from, where it's like the same type of person is good at shutting down those pathways that would, for a normal human being, lead them to discontinue something. But there are like certain hardened people who are really good at like pushing through discomfort, like CrossFitters, right? Like, they're machines. They also get hurt. And like, those things are correlated for a reason.
Yeah.
Because if you're really good at pushing through discomfort and pain, you're probably going to do it whenever it leads to good stuff, but also whenever it leads to bad stuff. And you don't really know how to walk that fine line and shut yourself down before it gets into the bad stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and here, I know you got ready to bounce, but with the CrossFitters, I think, to my point I just made, there's a difference between, it's like a lot of CrossFitters get hurt because their movements are nuanced and they require their whole bodies, for the most part, to be operating in complete unison perfectly. And so there's a lot of things that go wrong, so they inherently, something goes wrong. There's also a difference between a CrossFitter who's like out of breath and runs that extra sprint or does that extra burpee or that extra, wall push-up, and a CrossFitter who's like sprinting across the field and like they brown out, right? They like half like lose consciousness and they go, I'm going to keep going. It's like, like that's that feedback. That's that voice. That's like, everyone should stop here. You're not cool if you pass by here, and understanding the difference of what those voices sound like is really important. But no, quick one for you guys today. Obviously, just covering these. We're going to probably do more like these. We'll come better equipped. We're using new equipment today, and so that's why and we probably should just brush up on our fucking anatomy as well. We shouldn't have to think that hard.
No, we should just fucking cut that whole damn thing.
Yeah, that whole.
Wow, I was like flabbergasted.
As soon as I said the acromion, I was like, imagine being in class and then someone asks you a question. You're like, I know this 100%, but I did not expect to be asked this question. So, blah, and hope that it runs. But then I thought about that. I'm like, that was so wrong. I know that was wrong because I know what the fucking muscles do, and they definitely don't insert there. But no, thank you very much for tuning in, guys. We will catch you on the next Q&A. Make sure you throw us all of the studies that you find. We'll continue to drop these questions you have about your training or nutrition. We will make sure we, incorporate them over time. Talk to you soon.